understanding adolescence is an important piece of this process because you have to understand where your teens are at to understand how to communicate effectively with them. Okay. So we understand that adolescence is somewhere between the ages of 20 and 12 and 25 is this time frame of when the brain and body are changing. They do not reach full and when we talk about adolescents, when we talk about 25, they're not reaching their full brain development as a person until around the age of 25. And this has an impact on the way that they handle agreements, the way they understand communication, and the way that they relate to you. So a lot of what I teach is based on Dr. Daniel Siegel's work. Great book, if you haven't read it already, is Brainstorm. And this book explains pretty much what I'm going to be explaining very briefly here. It goes into a lot of detail with a lot of activities and exercises to help in understanding your adolescent. So those moments when you're feeling really frustrated, like you want to pull your hair out, and we want to come back to a level of compassion and understanding of what's actually happening to know why sometimes you feel the push and the rub. So number one, our kids' brains are completely remodeling. They have typically been, as a child, their brain is like a sponge. They've been taking in everything that they can. That's the nature of their brain, is just to be basically open and collect all this information. But as they are also operating primarily from their limbic brain, which is their emotional brain, which is why toddlers have tantrums, is because they don't have the language yet to explain what's going on. They are in a very emotional, self-focused place. But as they develop into adolescence, their prefrontal cortex, which is the place for their executive functioning and problem solving, is what is developing. So it's rewiring for optimal functioning and moving from the limbic to the executive functioning of the prefrontal cortex. In this process, it's beginning to prune away all of the synapses that are no longer being used. So that kid who was learning to play the violin as a child and then stopped around 10 or 11 and wants to pick it up again at 15 is going to have a harder time because they stopped using that knowledge and that information, and their brain said, well, we're not using this anymore, so I'm going to cut it away. And so it begins to lose things and destroying itself and taking away the things that it doesn't seem relevant to its brain anymore. But you can imagine if synapses and things are being cut, what that might feel like to a person. You've all been an adolescent before. You all have gone through those stages of feeling confused and overwhelmed, and like one day you're happy and one day you're sad. You know, this is part of that process, is this pruning away. And then what happens is a myelination. And so there's connections in places that are strengthened. This is usually when a child chooses a path, right? Like they were doing 5 different sports when they were little, and now they're kind of honing in on one. And that place is being myelinated like a super highway. It's like this place in the brain that just goes there and knows what's happening. And it's what we call specialization. We become specialists as we get a little older. And then what starts to happen a little bit later is integration. It's the linking of these different parts, which creates that sense of flexibility and adaptability and the ability to regulate themselves. Those things don't come online automatically. So the expectations we have of our kids to just, pull it together are sometimes unrealistic because there's a lot going on in their brains, especially in adolescence, that they're not always able to do that. But as they get older, you begin to see this integration. You get to see the kids find their sense of who they are and how to balance themselves a little bit better, hopefully. And so what we see are these very specific parts of adolescence that you all, I'm sure, have seen and have experienced yourself. Number one, it's a very emotionally intense time, right? It's the pruning exposes these vulnerable circuits. It creates confusion and moodiness. It's uncomfortable. There's a sense of aliveness, but there's also a sense of overwhelm that can happen for our teens. There's also shift to social engagement. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a moment, about what the research and studies are showing about what happens to how our kids actually hear our voices anymore. Okay, it changes. Their drive is for moving towards separation from you and finding their own place in the world. And this can take their sense of self from following to the letter what's happening, the way it's been before. Okay, they are going to negotiate. They have feelings and desires. Their passions are growing, and so they're going to want to um, lean towards what feels socially engaging for them. There's also a lot of novelty seeking, and I'm sure a lot of you went through this too. How many of you can look back and go, wow, I cannot believe I lived through that situation that I did, this reckless thing I did as a teen, and I don't even know why I did it, right? This is normal. There's changes in their dopamine reward circuitry. So there's this level of impulsivity and like doing things, and you're like, if you've ever asked yourself, why on earth did you do that? Pause and don't say that because the truth is they may not really fully understand, but there is this level of impulsivity that can happen. And then you'll also see some hyper rational thinking, rationalizing their behaviors that we may not, with our experience, life experience, may not understand. But this novelty seeking is real. There's also a level of creative exploration. It's a time of expanded thinking. This is a lot of time when our teens begin to become advocates or find social justice things to focus on. Our teens are actually primed to be problem solvers. And this is what we want to capitalize on the most, is they're actually, and this is part of their negotiation, is their brain is saying, I have a solution to this problem, but I just need you to listen to me. They actually, if we gave them problems to solve, social justice problems, they would figure it out. We just have to do the work of listening and helping them to tease it out and into becoming realistic. And that's our work, is helping them to stay focused in that creative way. Okay, so I found this really interesting research while I was preparing for this, and this is what I was talking about in terms of how our kids are hearing us, particularly the moms. But this was a study done at Stanford University. There's this neurodevelopmental shift in reward circuitry from mothers to non-familiar voices in adolescence. So Daniel Abrams and his team at Stanford University were doing MRIs, focusing on what happens when a teen is listening they just focused on 13 and 14-year-olds. Okay, what's happening in their brain when they're hearing their mother's voice versus hearing another adult voice? Okay, particularly a female in this case, so that they could discern. They even used strangers and vacuum sounds, and they used wording that was gibberish. It wasn't like anything that had any meaning. It was just the sound of the voice that they were doing. In younger children, these scans showed that the mom's voices triggered a variety of areas of the brain responsible for hearing and emotional processing and visual processing. Among the teenagers' brains, though, all of these areas increased in intensity. And in fact, the relationship was so strong that they could predict a participant's age using the voice response data. But notably, the teens showed a stronger brain response to an unfamiliar voice, especially in areas related to rewards processing and assigning social value. So this is what I was explaining before, is that you're not crazy when you're saying to yourself, I don't understand why why I'm saying these things and my child is just not listening. It's biological. Okay. Their brain is beginning to transition to actually hear other people's voices. Now, this isn't exactly a plug for my work, but it is a plug to say that a lot of times helping your teen when they're starting to struggle with something and you feel like you've talked to them and they're not quite getting what you're saying, is that sometimes it's actually helpful to find another adult in their life, whether it's a family member or whether it's a coach or a therapist, to begin to have the conversations with them, because they might actually hear what they have to say a little more clearly than what you as the parent have to say. So you're not crazy, okay? And this is what the village used to be for our children, right? When we lived in community, when we lived in villages, we could know that the aunties and the uncles and the grandparents and the elders of the community could have sway and voice with our children when we could not. Okay. So just know that to be true, and that you can give yourself a little bit of a break, that there's nothing wrong with what you're doing. You're not failing, I promise. Okay. So why is this so important? It's important because we have to have, as the parents, a level of compassion and understanding for what is actually happening for them in order for us to reach them. Okay. We have to understand that they're going to make choices. And, um, you know, as Jenny said, that you can't anticipate every problem. You can't anticipate every situation, but we're going to talk about some frameworks and some ways, because you're not going to, I'll just tell you right now, you're not going to make agreements once and they're going to work forever. You're going to have to keep coming back to them and back to them and back to them as situations arise, because every child is different. This is also, it's important because we have to normalize what's happening. Okay. When you understand that your child is not lazy, not thoughtless, not irreverent, right? We can focus on teaching them and not punishing them for behaviors that we are struggling to understand. Okay. We have to be able to normalize that our kids are going through a lot in adolescence, and it's not to make excuses for them, but it is to create understanding so that we can help teach them the skills as their prefrontal cortex is developing. Okay. And this is a time for skill building, both for us and for our kids. Okay. As they're building, we're teaching new skills and having, that's supposed to be reasonable expectations for them. Okay. So in that, I talk with parents often about this concept that Daniel, and for myself, as somebody who lives in community, this is a concept that I come back to over and over and over again. When you are living in relation with multiple people, you have the me, the I, the autonomous human that you are and that your children are, with a level of desire to have personal responsibility, but there is also a we. Okay. There is a collective of people, including you and your child. And that community and support and team is something that we're often, I'm sure many of you say it, I say it all the time. Hey, this household is a team. We work together. We all have responsibilities that are age appropriate. And this is the message that there is actually both, and they have to hold each other. It can't just be about me and what I want, or you and what you want. Those are important aspects, but there is also a we. And we want to build this capacity for ourselves and each other, that there is a we as we make these decisions. And as we said, part of this, and we'll talk about boundaries, is that when we don't have these things, when we're too much in the we, the shadow is codependence, right? You can't do something without the other. There is a level of codependence or permeable boundaries, like no boundaries, right? They do whatever they want, or I do whatever I want, but that doesn't respect the needs of the other person. And the shadow of somebody being too focused on the me is isolation or rigid boundaries, right? A self-focus that doesn't allow for any flexibility. What we're working here, is a pendulation, right? That's why I have the image of the pendulum there, is that we pendulate between the two, and it's constant. It never stops. We have to balance between what I need, what you need, and what we need as a collective. Okay. All right. So let's talk about this. I'm afraid to take us off of the screen because I'm going to lose it all again. So we're going to keep it here. You can raise your hand. You can just pop off of mute and just let me know as I shared all of this, any questions, any ahas, any frustrations about, or something that I missed when it comes to adolescent brain development?
I can share a little bit. No, it was just great to reminder to think about like the impulsivity, especially, of our teenager and how he's like sometimes just like so freaking quick with the trigger finger and like, and a lot of times it's against his little brother, but sometimes it's against Ava, and stuff like that. He's like, rah, he yells like that. Not so much against me. Like he's not super aggro against me that much, but it's like, dude, like, it blows me away sometimes. And sometimes I'm like, I like react initially like really strongly, like, yo, like back off, dude.
Yeah.
Like, and like, I got Ava sometimes to check me and go, hey, like, don't, hey, you don't get like violent with him either. Like, let's not like coordinate for confrontation here,
Right.
like, or anything. But like, so yeah, that's a good reminder. Like, hey, we gotta understand that they're, you know, gonna react kind of quick with to some stuff.
You are. Yeah, it's a good observation.
And
It's
then
true.
one time I was thinking of, yeah, recently was like Rilo came up and like pushed his brother in the street. Like the little brother was provoking him, being kind of a jerk, like kept on stopping in front of him as we're walking down the street and like making him like trip over him. And it was super annoying. And then at one point he was just like, stop it, and pushed him so
Yeah.
hard that if I didn't catch him, he would like broke his face on the concrete.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. There is a sense there's so many surges of things happening for them, and it's true. There is definitely a level of impulsivity, particularly in sibling relationships. I see that a lot. Um, but yeah, or in response to something, right? They're reactive instead of responsive. And this is what we're trying to teach them, but we have to have some compassion that, like, oh, right, that's not formed in his brain yet. Like, he doesn't necessarily have the capacity yet, or consistently, I will say, because I will hear a lot of parents say, well, but they've shown me this before. I know they can do it. It's like, yes, they know how. It doesn't mean that their brain is consistently wired to do it yet, right? He's not consistently wired yet to like depersonalize what's happening, set a boundary clearly instead of becoming reactive. Ava, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I also want to add that summer vacation, being all together for so many hours, it takes a new set of agreements. It takes to get used to be, with each other because, I mean, Rilo leaves home like at 7 a.m. and like throughout the year with sport, he doesn't come out home until like, I don't know, sometime 8 p.m. So it's like he's more used to dealing with teachers and friends that with his own family. So the trigger, I mean, anything that triggers him, now he's kind of exploding.
Yeah.
So we had like a few episodes during the summer. We just came back from our family vacation. But I was like, I told I got both of my kids and I said, you got the right to be angry. You got the right to be, it's okay to be frustrated and making mistakes. But we cannot hurt each other. Can we agree on this?
Mhm.
We can know her each other, like Rilo, it's like, he's like, I don't know, like a foot like taller than me, and he's so strong. He's an athlete. He can really hurt me, So for now, that's working. And I told Rilo, I know that sometimes you won't remember my words, but can you think about it? We can't hurt each other. You can be angry, you can be frustrated, and we can make mistakes, but you cannot hit your brother or hit me. He never done that. He never hit me, but it's like I'm open the umbrella,
Yeah.
so yeah, so yeah, that's a good. I love that Travis says it's
Yeah.
it's a refreshing. He's learning more about this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to say too, just to highlight something that you shared is that if you notice that your kids are having more explosions or more emotionality at home versus at school or with their friends or things like that, that's very normal. And it's actually as a demonstration of how safe they feel at home with you. Okay. Um, we want, we of course we want our kids to be respectful out in public. And a lot of times, and we also want them to be respectful to us, but to know that they feel safe enough to sort of like be fully themselves or let down their guard to not hold it all in is actually a good sign.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have an observation. I definitely noticed that my daughter has gotten more emotionally intense, and then there's small things that are just little triggers to her, and she goes from 0 to
Mm-hmm.
60. It's not as high yet, I think, because she's still younger, I think, in a really, really quick time frame. How at what point in time, I know you said let's, that we have to excuse them because they're not necessarily all that in their executive functioning skills. What would be like, there's an excusing and then there is also a limit to things.
Well,
Yeah.
what I said, we don't want to excuse it, but we have to
Oh,
understand. Okay.
yes. Yes,
Not,
exactly.
we're still going to hold a boundary about it, right?
Okay.
We're going to
Yeah.
talk about how and when to do that.
Okay.
Because there's a time and a place to correct. Okay.
Got it.
And yeah, in that moment when she's exploding, what you want, and we'll get to that, but we're going to talk about nervous system regulation in just a moment. But you have to be able to stay regulated to respond, hold the boundary so that she feels safe enough to be able to recognize what's happening for her and to be able to correct it. Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're not going to correct it in a moment of high,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I totally understand that. And we usually, when
we don't.
these things happen, we usually like let it go, let her have her emotion. It's totally acceptable to have her emotion. And then later on, we're like, all right, let's sit down. What's happening here? So we're talking about it then. But it feels like lately we have a lot of those discussions. And I'm sure that also becomes overwhelming to her that it feels like you're constantly in that mode of reflection and honing in, and it's just a lot. I feel.
So hopefully what we'll get to today is you'll have a plan of having a family meeting of some sort to talk about some patterns that are happening and how you're each going to respond in future rather than having to hash it out every time, right? There's a framework, there's a pattern that's happening here for her.
Yeah.
You don't have to go into every single one. You can probably usually tease out what's the underlying theme here. We can address it.
Okay.
Yeah, Lena?
I think what come up for me listening to what you were saying, Amy, or what we were showing us was the concrete evidence of how the brain is reacting to different people. Because I think sometimes we get stuck in these like arguments and discussions because we take everything so personal. And if we ask them, hey, this is what I heard, is this your intent? Is this what you want to say? Because I'm kind of hurt. Did you intend to hurt me? And they don't really. And it's just nice to be reminded that the brain is going through all this so that we can allow ourselves to be like, okay, all right, I can take a breath. It's okay.
Exactly. Yeah. In the informational call we did the other day that I did on Wednesday, one of the moms shared a story of her daughter going to a sleepover, staying up till 4:30 in the morning. She picks up her daughter the next day and she's, super dysregulated, which we'll talk about in a second. And they go to get something to eat. And her daughter's really snappy and moody and like, going at her at the restaurant, and the mom got up and like left the restaurant and sat outside for a little bit, to cool off. But her daughter like came out and was like, why are you out here? Like it jarred her a little bit that the mom separated from her. But the idea was, she was like, I'm not gonna be, she said, I'm not coming in unless you're gonna talk to me differently, right? And she asked me my advice, and I said, that's, number one, good not getting engaged in the fight, right? She's clearly dysregulated. You can see that. Don't take it personally. Number two, there were two things that I suggested. One was that you have just what you're talking about, Lena, these words that you can say, like, maybe try that again, or is that what you really meant? Maybe try that a different way. I want to hear you, but that didn't sound, that didn't feel really good. But the second piece I told her is that in terms of attachment, we're going to talk about attachment in a few minutes, is that we also have to sort of let our kids know, like the boundary has to be spoken, right? Like I will not, and this goes to you, what you were talking about, Grit, is, when we can say, hey, we've established what the boundary is when we're in a regulated state. And then when this behavior comes up, I'm going to remind you that this is the boundary that we have, and this is what's okay and not okay. And here's what I'm going to do in response to this. So we're going to get to a lot of that in a little bit. But you're absolutely right, Lena, is that a lot of times we can't take it personally. We have to have some compassion and understanding, but we have to have tools of how to redirect the conversation, because they don't, unless there's a lot of pain and upset about something that they're not talking about, which can be the case, they're not usually trying to hurt you on purpose. They're just trying to be heard and understood. So thank you for sharing that, Lena. Yeah, Amy.
Oh, we were laughing because a while ago I saw a meme from a mom that was like, having a teenager is like dating a guy who's just not that into you. And the meme had like a screenshot of mom saying, "Oh, I love you so much. I hope you have a great day." And like hours later, the teen responds like, "Bro, can you make me a sandwich?" or whatever, And I have so I started sending Chris screenshots of exactly that type of conversation with my teenager. I'm like, "I love you, I miss you," whatever. And he's like, "Can I get this game?" Or, so we're laughing about the whole study. I mean, it's great, but it also legitimately made me think like, what other resources do we have? Would it be good to choose a therapist to support him? And so it's good to know, like, as much as it's a shift. Like has been my little buddy, my little adventure partner. He always wanted to hang out with me, just like so much connection and adoration. So to have that shift, I'm like, okay, it's not just me.
Heard
And,
anything, but no,
yeah.
it's not you.
It's just not that into me.
Yeah, that's really funny. You should send
Everything we're talking about with the impulsivity and the triggers. He also shared with me recently, he's like, I have like 1,000 triggers. I'm like triggered all the time. So we're starting to have that self-awareness conversation, and how do you start to regulate when you're feeling those triggers. And so yeah.
So good. So good. All right. Unless there's another burning share, we're going to move along. Great reflections, everyone. Okay, so we're going to do, I could do a whole 3-hour workshop just on the nervous system, but we're going to do a very brief, and I apologize that this image is so blurry, but hopefully you can see it enough. I'm not as worried about what you're seeing on the right-hand side. But what this is what's called polyvagal theory. And this is understanding that we have what's called the vagus nerve that runs from the base of our skull. It's a nerve that runs, it's called the wandering nerve, and it touches every organ in the body. And this is part of what regulates our parasympathetic nervous system. So a very, very brief overview of our nervous system. We have the sympathetic nervous system, which is our action, doing part of our nature. I am personally in my sympathetic nervous system right now. You are too, as you're learning. We are actively using this part of ourselves. Parasympathetic is our rest and digest and repair, and it's the place where we are calm and engaged. Okay. Our nervous system responds in 2 ways, either in safety or under threat, and it looks very different in both. Right now, my guess is, unless anything I'm saying is triggering for you, I'm guessing that you're all in a sympathetic state of safety. Okay. You're in your homes, we're learning, we're connecting. This part down here, you're socially engaged, right? You're calm and connected, settled, feeling maybe grounded and a little bit compassionate. It is at the point that something happens and our body responds the same way, whether we're being chased by a bear or whether we're facing stress in our life, social stress in our life. It's going to respond the same way. It's going to get activated. And our experiences in our life will determine how we respond to that. We will often, in what we call arousal, move into, to begin with, fight or flight. This is a sympathetic response to danger. The fight will look like rage, anger, irritation, frustration, right? We'll see that a lot in our teens, but we also see flight. If you have teens who tend to get panicky or worried or anxious, right? That is wanting to move away from the stimuli that's causing the arousal. Okay. You either move towards or you move away, but it's still a response of, I can do something about the feeling that I'm having. Okay. That's the pushback that you feel, or that's the retreat to the bedroom. Okay. Where we get, these are normal. They're healthy to some degree, as long as there is an arc to it. Okay. There's an activation and a deactivation, and we can move through it. And of course we want that arc to be a little faster, or in a reasonable amount of time. When we get into a sense of when the arousal is too much, someone will freeze. This is shutdown. This is actually when they go to their room and shut the door and don't come out for 8 hours, right? That's a freeze state. That's a level, it can be a level of dissociation when we sort of check out of our own bodies. Depression, a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness, and is actually a feeling of I can't. If your child or you have ever gotten into a state where you feel completely frozen, like, I don't even know what to do with this situation, this is a freeze state. This is actually normal. We are mammals. So if I were a rabbit in the wild and a predator was chasing me and I laid down and played dead, that is actually a healthy response. It's a healthy freeze response. But what do I do when I get up? If I'm a rabbit, I get up and I shake it off. And I don't hold the trauma of being chased by a predator. Okay. The challenge is, a lot of times, some of us, if we've been in a situation where it's too much, too fast, too soon, this is what creates trauma, because our system gets so overwhelmed that we can't actually respond effectively to the situation. The rabbit who freezes, who goes into, playing dead and gets up and shakes it off, he's able to move the energy of his nervous system through his body to not hold that anymore. Okay. We don't always know how to do that anymore as mammals. We haven't been taught all the time, and we are faced with a lot of stress all the time. So our cortisol is constantly up, and we're constantly feeling a sense of being in fight or flight all the time. So it's very easy, if you're always up there, to move into a freeze state pretty easily. Okay. But we have to be able to find ways to come down. So why do I share all of this with you? In understanding what is happening both in your body and ours, is we have to understand that there are things that we have to be able to do to regulate our nervous system. And we, as the adults, if we're not able to regulate our nervous system, your kids are going to have a harder time regulating theirs. This has been the biggest personal lesson for myself, as someone who has experienced traumatic things in my life. Due to various health challenges that I face, my nervous system is constantly on being pressurized. So I've had to learn how to do things to get regulated before I can have conversations. We have to understand that we have what I call the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain, right? We use our executive functioning is our upstairs brain. This is the place where we problem solve, but we cannot problem solve if we're in our limbic downstairs brain of survival. Okay. So when you're trying to have conversations with your kids and they're activated and you're activated, this is why it doesn't work. Okay. We have to get back up to our upstairs brain to be able to have these conversations. We also have to have a level of understanding of attachment, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Attachment and an ability to co-regulate. Okay. If you, as the parent, have the capacity to regulate yourself, you have the capacity to co-regulate with your child to help them. The same way that a mother, when a baby is born, they often will put the baby skin to skin. Why do they do that? Because the baby is not able to regulate their body temperature on their own. They need the parent and the touch of the parent, whether it's a mother or father, it does not matter, to regulate temperature and heart rate. Okay, it's the same thing. Our babies don't stop needing co-regulation because they can walk and talk. They actually, in adolescence, need it as much, if not more sometimes, is to know that you are there and can sort of breathe through and help regulate before we try to correct. Connect before correct. Okay, remember that always. Connect before correct. And timing is everything. Okay, we have to be mindful of where you are, where your teen is before you try to come to some sort of agreement. Okay, you can't in the moment of dysregulation say, this is not acceptable, we need to do this differently. It's like, everybody knows that. Okay, I think it's intuitively obvious that something needs to change. So what's really most important is those moments is not to try to fix it, but to try to, okay, we're dysregulated. Let's see what we can do to get back to a regulated state.